So we just had that PlayStation showcase this week, and I wanted to go back to it for one thing in particular, because after the showcase ended, a lot of people noticed something, and that's that Sony's best studio was fully on display here, and that's Insomniac Games. See, when they first picked up Insomniac, there was a lot of excitement around the acquisition, but now we're starting to see just how good of a deal that was for Sony, and we're going to go over that here today because I also think Insomniac is potentially the most important studio that Sony has now as well. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first of all, Insomniac's been around for a long time. They're founded in 1994, so it's been like 27 years that they've been around. And the biggest thing, or at least the biggest takeaway for a lot of people after this showcase, is just how many games appear to be coming out of Insomniac left and right, whereas some of Sony's other studios seem to just kind of show one game and then spend like years and years and years working on that one title. It doesn't really match up for people when they look at it from the outside. But Insomniac's been doing this for a long time. Like, them having these game releases left and right isn't necessarily new for them. In fact, in their 27 years they've been around, they've developed 35 games. So, like, they're developing more than one game and releasing per year. And Insomniac appears to be pretty good at working on multiple projects at the same time and just getting them prepped to showcase and then release around that same period. So that's why we got Ratchet & Clank, and then we had Spider-Man Miles Morales for the PS5 launch. It appears they're going to be going away for a little while, a couple of years, to get Spider-Man 2 ready to go, and then I assume Wolverine will roll out soonish after that. I mean, that could be like a 2024 game. Nonetheless, though, we'd be talking about them releasing 4 bigger PS5 titles in its first half of its life. Now, I had mentioned that this isn't new for Insomniac, and if you go and take a look at all of the titles that they have released, there's a good list here that we have rounded up on Wikipedia. In 96, they had Disruptor. That was a first-person shooter on the PlayStation 1. So, like I said, they've pretty much been developing with Sony since the beginning, but you can see here they went on a run with Spyro the Dragon. 98, 99, and 2000. They had a new Spyro game out every year, back to back to back. They took a year off, and then they came out with Ratchet & Clank, then Ratchet & Clank again, then Ratchet & Clank again, then Ratchet & Clank again. Like, there were just 4 years where they just did new Ratchet & Clank, one after the other after the other, and then they followed up and went right to the PlayStation 3 with Resistance. You can just see this string where they just had from 2002 all the way until 2009, where they had Ratchet & Clank Future A Crack in Time. They just had a game every single year, and it didn't matter that they transitioned from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3. And here's the interesting thing about Insomniac, and why I kind of look at them as a studio that is great for Sony to lean on for any kind of project, because they have experience with just about every system out there. I mean, if you look at their list, they've worked with things for VR with Oculus. They've worked on the Magic Leap 1, which is like an augmented reality headset. They've worked on Windows. They've worked on the Vita, iOS. So they have experience with mobile devices as well and making things work in that environment. But like, then we have them, of course, going on their run very recently, where they had Spider-Man Miles Morales, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and they revealed Marvel's Spider-Man 2 and Marvel's Wolverine. Now, the reason I think that Insomniac has now become the most important studio to Sony is because they are allowing them to expand further into the Marvel universe. I know it's the same staple of studios that has Sucker Punch, Sony Santa Monica, Naughty Dog, Guerrilla. But we see Insomniac just coming out with game after game after game, and now they're being tasked with, I think, building out their own kind of Marvel video game universe right now. I mean, think about Spider-Man and how big of an IP that is, and Sony as well as Marvel collaborating are trusting Insomniac, and they did that with Spider-Man back in 2018. Obviously paid off big time. The game sold very, very well. They also did a remaster while they moved it to the PS5 with Spider-Man Miles Morales. That sold very well, and that was like the biggest game for the PS5, at least selling-wise. I'm sure that got people very excited for that PlayStation 5 launch. I enjoyed the game quite a bit. I know it was a smaller game, quote unquote, but I think I still got quite a bit of game time out of that for the price. And Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is going to be in people's Game of the Year conversations this year. That's the biggest thing about Insomniac. They get games out frequently, but they're high-quality games. They're not just like throwaway titles. They just get out there, just say they release something. There's a lot of care and attention that go into their games, especially with the most recent ones. And I mean, think about this. They're working with Disney and Marvel, and they get Wolverine, which Wolverine is extremely popular as well, up there with Spider-Man. So they go to Insomniac, they say, hey, you're going to make Spider-Man 2, we're going to bring in Venom, and people are speculating about other characters and villains, I'll say, that are going to be in there. And then we also want you to work on Wolverine. You can do that, right? It's interesting that just kind of gets thrown to Insomniac. They're like, yeah, we got this. And the biggest thing here is we talk about how these shows from Sony and really any of these companies, to be honest, I know it comes up with Sony a lot because they call themselves storytellers, but we see a cinematic trailer. It's all CG and stuff. We don't see any gameplay, and that ends up being a criticism around these shows. But when we saw Spider-Man 2 and we saw Wolverine, I really didn't see a lot of people criticize the idea of CG trailers there. And I think there's a few reasons why. We know what Spider-Man is. We know what Wolverine is. We can kind of envision the games there. That's fine. But I also kind of feel like we know Insomniac enough to be like, okay, they're letting us know what they're going to be working on. Spider-Man 2 is a couple years off now. Wolverine could be 3 or 4 years off for all we know. But there's trust there in Insomniac. You can't really say that about a lot of developers because eventually they mess up. But we have Insomniac releasing 35 games in their 27-year history, and they're not all great games, obviously. We have some games that they just released, like Bad Dinos Fusion. So they're Android iOS games, but when they show up with a budget maybe provided by Sony with things like Resistance or some of the older Ratchet & Clank games or Spyro, they will generally deliver. So there is that trust from gamers when they show us things like a cinematic trailer for Spider-Man 2 or Marvel's Wolverine. They didn't really show us anything for Wolverine, technically, but we're all very excited about the idea of Insomniac tackling that. So they have the trust of Sony as well as gamers. And really, that's something they've earned over the past couple of decades here with their releases. But now I am thinking about a future where Insomniac just has a bunch of these Marvel IPs, and eventually they have crossovers for them. Could you imagine we get to a point where we're playing Spider-Man 3 way off in the future, and oh look, Wolverine is part of a mission in there, or maybe Iron Man comes in for something, and they just continue to allow Insomniac to build out that overall video game Marvel universe. And maybe we do get to a point where we actually get a good Avengers game. You know what? I do trust Insomniac to tackle any of these superhero games. And now looking back on it after what we've seen here from Insomniac, what a steal that acquisition was for Sony at $229 million. We are now to the point, just a couple of years after that, that people get kind of that hyped factor when they just see the Insomniac logo flash up before a game reveal. And I look forward to what Insomniac has for us as we go along with Spider-Man 2 and Marvel's Wolverine. But let me know what you guys think about all this down below. Do you think that Insomniac, especially right now, is Sony's best studio, or are you still looking towards like Sony Santa Monica or Naughty Dog or Sucker Punch as still like that top developer, the top studio at Sony? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.